kind of give a little bit of a preamble. So first of all, Drew is the founder / CTO at Funkhouse. He is a rockstar developer and one of our key regular speakers who always teaches us a lot. And so he's created this app that is kind of like teaching us about both Nuxt and really get them going. So he's going to really kind of give us a great lesson here. So, that being said, we'll kick it to Drew. I'm going to mute everybody, including myself, and Drew will be the main leader here.
Thanks, Kobe. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here. Let me just give a quick little update on who I am to just recap what Kobe was saying there. Yeah, I started one of the founders at Funkhouse 10 years ago now. We're a web development design. We do a lot of design work and content and everything as well, but I run the programming team here at Funkhouse. We do lots of front-end design and development, mostly very high design kind of portfolio websites for Hollywood kind of industry and a lot of boutique hotels and things like that. So we're doing a lot of custom code pretty much on most websites. So with a WordPress CMS as a backend. Our stack is largely Nuxt on the front end, and traditionally Nuxt on the front end with a WordPress backend via like GraphQL talking to the front end. But we've been doing more and more sort of web apps that don't need a CMS or that need more than just like a sort of blogging CMS like WordPress. So we've been looking for a long time trying to figure out the best kind of backend as a service for web apps. Or I guess could be any app, but for us, it's always a web app. And we use Firebase a lot on some big projects. And I'd never really loved the way it kind of felt so disconnected. Like it's sort of pitched as like, oh, this all-in-one platform, but you end up having to be digging through some Google G Suite panel to turn on this thing, and it's like very disconnected. And I didn't love that the way it's sort of database is kind of hidden and you can't really see what's going on as easily. And you also like the API interaction is not set up great for GraphQL, which is what we use for everything. And I really do think it's the future. So anyway, so we've been looking around for a while. I've been sort of paying attention to like GraphQL platform as a service, backend as a service. There's a few different options. And I came across Apix. So Apix is, think of it like a competitor to Firebase, but GraphQL driven and trying to be more integrated. They've still got a little ways to go, and we'll cover some of their sort of like to be decided stuff that they're working on. But we hired them to do the back end on a project, and then my team ran the front end on it, and that project has been really successful. And sort of part of their contract with us was to sort of teach me and my team, but really mostly me, on their whole platform, sort of end to end, and how to write, to use and stuff. So I sort of became like an expert at it over the last couple of months. And so when I showed it once in one of these meetups, and Kobe wanted to sort of know more about it. So I've now put together this presentation I'm going to go through now, with the main idea being that I really do think that the most sort of to-do apps that like frameworks give out as a example of like how to build something are like kind of fraudulent a little bit. It's always like, sounds super easy, and then it's like the to-do app one is kind of a joke, because anyone that would really try and build an app like that is going to have to deal with persisting the record on the server at some point, like almost immediately. That app is pointless unless you can save the data somewhere. So then you have to deal with authentication and all these things, which are never built into any of these frameworks. So it becomes this like big sort of learning curve that you really have to get over to build anything somewhat useful with most of these frameworks, unless you're just doing a straight sort of portfolio website thing, which, you know, is good, but it's not what these frameworks are great at, which is these complicated kind of UIs and things like that. So this is, I think, what I put together here for everyone is essentially like a starter kit for doing this with 8base as the backend. So let me share my screen and we'll get into it. So here we go. Okay. Thumbs up, Kobe. This can be seen by everyone. Yep. All right, cool. So there's two repos that you need.
Can everybody see? Are we good? There is a chat window if people want to chime in there too, but all right, just feel free to text me if you don't see stuff, and I'm going to mute everybody again.
All right, cool. So if you go to the Funkhouse GitHub account, there's two repos here. We'll send out links to all this stuff too, so you don't need to do it right now. There's two repos here. So there's a front-end repo, which is Nuxt, and I'm going to walk you through all of this, but just so you can get it. And then there's a back-end repo, which is the server sort of custom functions that we deployed to the 8base servers. So that's kind of the setup, but let's start with the front-end one now. So my sort of goal here is I'm going to you could just download and use this, but you would have no understanding of how it all works. So I'm just going to walk you through how to sort of rebuild this repo. That's what these steps will do. And this will also serve as an introduction to Nuxt. So if people aren't familiar with how to use Nuxt or install Nuxt, we're going to learn that right now. So where we're going is I want to sort of build a real basic kind of clone of Instagram. That's the idea. So
Drew, can we zoom in a teeny bit just to make sure everybody can see because it's a little small?
On this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the code's more important than this, but just, yeah, I mean, a little bit.
I don't know if I can, how do I zoom in on my?
I think that worked.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So we're going to build basically a small clone of Instagram. So we're going to have to define a data model and set up like our backend part. We're going to code like a sign up, sign in, log in, and log out like function and store like your token and all that kind of stuff. Then we're going to be able to upload an image and create like a post essentially, and store the data so that like page loads work if I come back to the app in a day and all that kind of stuff. And then I'll show you this one. We'll see if we have time. I'll show you how to actually deploy custom functions to 8base so that we can do unique things on the back end. So first thing is to do this, you kind of need more than just the free tier of 8base. The free tier of 8base is pretty useless. It's more just as a sort of poke around and see how it works, not really building anything. So the main sort of like bit that will break is they won't let you sign up enough users to do this in any kind of real way, or integrate with a different API provider. So we'll get into it. So first things first, create an account and sign into 8base. This is what that would look like. You just kind of sign in like this. I'll give you a quick sort of rundown on what we're looking at here. So you have different sort of areas of 8base. The one that we're going to start with is the data modeling part of it, which is over here. So this is essentially the database. So this is 8base's kind of like GUI for managing a database. And by default, you would not have any tables here. It would just be empty. And we'll create some now, and I'll show you how that all works. Come back to it.
I'm going to ask again. Can you zoom in a little more? Because I think it is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure it is for people. Can you maybe a little more even?
It's because I'm on a big screen, and so
yeah, I think that's why I think you're seeing stuff we're not seeing. Meaning, like it just go try one more up, one more zoom in. Yeah, I think that's more viewable. Keep going.
It's going to have to deal with a bit of toggling back and forth, guys, if we do this, but we'll do what we can. Cool. So this is the database kind of layer, and this is the sort of schema, which is I'm not sure if everyone sort of knows what that word means, but it means like kind of defining the data model for your database. And then this would be the existing sort of entries in the database, and we'll get into that later. This is 8base's kind of like place to map or to understand what custom functions you have running on their server, and we'll get into all of that later. The API Explorer, I'm not going to give away what that does yet. It's really, really cool. We'll get into that in a second. This is just the users that are signed up to this application. There's some intricacies to this that we'll get into as well. Same with app services, and these ones we won't really touch on just yet. But so let's start with the data layer. So we're going to create some tables to store our information in. So it's as easy as going like this, creating a table. And I will call this table, like I'm just going to recreate posts and likes. So I'm just going to call it posts too, right? So this is going to be an Instagram post. So the things that we would want on this could be kind of anything, right? So you've got some predefined user, like ones you have to have, like a unique ID and created by and times and stuff like that. They're just system fields. We'd want a caption, be the first one. It'll be text. We'd want to limit how many characters it can be to, let's say, 500. Should we allow multiple captions, or no, we just want the one. This is a description for the API Explorer that we'll get into later. Like, this is a caption limited to 500 characters, something like that, right? And is it mandatory? And this, like, can I create a post with this empty? There's a bunch of different stuff too. For now, on a default. So like, this is fine for now. Create field. Done. We'd want an image to go with this. So that would be a file. We don't need any of these other ones, not mandatory. Well, maybe this would be worth making mandatory because it's Instagram. We're not going to add something without an image. Got that? Cool. So now we'd also want to be able to like a image or a post. So I want to create a table called likes. I'm just going to make this 2 so I don't. And I'd want this to be a relationship to another table. So I'm going to call it posts. And I'm going to link it to my post to table, actually. And then this is like how we're going to access it in the API as a post. And now we can define all the relationships this way. So this is how many, a post can have multiple likes, but a like can only belong to one post. So that's what this sort of stuff allows you to figure out. It's very sort of databasey stuff, but this is, trust me, as easy as it ever gets. So we want allow multiple likes per post. No, we want that. Allow multiple likes per post. Allow multiple posts per like. No, we just want that one. And then we can define, description. This can be empty. And then we create this, and it will now link the two together. And so the idea is this is the one I did earlier that actually I know for sure works, and I didn't screw it up in any way. So we set the relationship field to likes. This, you'll see what that actually maps to in a minute. So that's that, and then that's that. So that's how they all link together. I'm just going to delete these so that we don't. I need to delete them. If you've ever had to deal with a database with Bookshelf or something, this would be such a pain in the ass.
I mean, I just keep thinking about the camel casing, etc. I was doing this in Rails, and how likely it is that something would have messed up. So yeah, this is a pleasure.
Yeah. Cool. You can even do cool stuff like dragging. You can drag this into this if you want to map them and stuff. It's really cool. Cool. So now that we've set up our tables, the users one is automatically made. You can't really edit it. You can change what you want to store on for each user if you wanted to, but we don't need to. You can now go so now we have a fully functioning API. So this is the API Explorer, which if anyone's sort of familiar with GraphQL, this is what it is. It's just GraphQL, which is like a GraphQL Explorer that they have built into API. So I now have all this API stuff just straight out of the box. So I can query for add a query, which is this for like all posts. This would be one post. This would be all posts. Right? And now that's it. That's an API up and running right now. Now this data is coming from posts data here. So like I can like not even have to build a UI if I don't want to. And this is kind of like just sort of faking a UI on the front end, but just through their dashboard. And I can like fake a like if I wanted to by just connecting it to a like, but say it's not, has no likes. And it's now in here. And I can do all kinds of filtering. If I had hundreds of records, I can filter it all different kind of ways to find what I need. So in our like production app, this kind of serves as like a dashboard for all of our like sort of customer support people when they're trying to track down like why something didn't get put where it's supposed to or something like that. So you kind of, that's really helpful. So now like I've added this post, I can go back into my API Explorer and I'll be able to see this one here. And I can, it's even like hinted, like I type in my image and I want to get the file ID or the file name, sorry. Oh. And the download URL. So now like, it's that easy, right? It's pretty good. So this little API documentation thing here is like that description I wrote would show up in here so that like you can, you know, if you're building this and you've got a whole team of people working on it, they can find stuff. And it's sort of all pretty neat. Like I can kind of see like a post list can take these kinds of arguments and all kinds of stuff. It's really handy. So we're going to get into that.
Just again, just to reiterate for those who don't know, like this is like GraphQL, like this comes kind of like part of like the GraphQL ecosystem, if you will, and like and 8bases has it integrated in there, but just for people that this is completely foreign to, this is kind of just like part of the way GraphQL is. Like this is something that comes with GraphQL.
Correct. Yeah. And so this is why like having a backend as a service built around GraphQL is really good. You get like all of this stuff pretty standard and it works really well. And we're very, very familiar with it. Like we use GraphQL with our WordPress setup and have the same like interaction, same graphical server and everything. So if you know GraphQL, you don't have to learn like some custom thing. It works really well. Cool. So we got some mock data now. We have gone through this Explorer. So like, I'm just sort of following along these steps here, right? So we've got the mock data now. So now we want to set up our authentication profile. And that is handled through app services, authentication. Cool. So 8base has a few different authentication profiles. So it has their own internal one, which is pretty limited. You just have to be okay with white labeled like sign up process. Like you'll end up a different domain, like auth.yourdomain.com. And you'll have like, you won't be able to control the like form logic or anything. It's hosted, which I think is like a horrible experience and depends on what you're building. But for anything that we're doing at Funkhouse, like that just is not going to fly. Like having someone else designing, it's one of my biggest pet peeves with any of these sort of like platforms that, oh, we make it so easy for a developer to build whatever you want, except for the sign up page. We build that. Like, how about you don't tell me how to design something? So anyway, don't use the 8base one. The Auth0 one is the easiest one to integrate with. Downside is you have to use Auth0. It's all sort of wrapped behind 8base, and we're going to go all into this now. Or you can provide your own one.
Do you want to give one sentence on what Auth0 is?
Yeah, so we're going to use it. So you're going to really get to know it. Auth0 is an authentication provider that handles like user sign-up flows and all that kind of stuff. And in theory, you could use Auth0 to like log into the website, but then be logged in on the phone already, you know, like all kinds of different, like it's a sort of abstracted authentication service. And then OpenID is like any authentications. There's a bunch of other ones like Okta and stuff. You could integrate with this. We're going to use Auth0 for now. I will say that 8base is like drastically revamping all of their authentication stuff to be able to do everything that we're going to be able to do now, but without needing Auth0 to do it, which I personally can't wait for. And I've been like hounding them to do this from the beginning because Auth0 is kind of like overkill for most people. Like it's really enterprise grade stuff. It's not that expensive. It's like $23 a month for like startup level kind of stuff, but it's definitely overkill and very, very complicated. We're going to skip over it, most of it. But to get this set up is just copy and pasting a bunch of fields from your Auth0 account. There's a video here that the 8base guys put together for us that shows you how to do that. There's a few little bits missing from the video, which I cover here in these steps. So if you're going to go through it all, just make sure you do steps 3 and 4. But once you're in, this is Auth0. We don't really need to know anything in here other than when we create a user, they're going to show up in this list here. And they will also show up in this list here. So you kind of get like an 8base user mapped to an Auth0 user. That's sort of how you have to think about it. These two users are like platform users, which are different than like app users. Again, I think that's really confusing, and so does 8base, and they're going to be changing that, which is good. But for now, you just kind of get like two users that don't really show up in Auth0. Cool. So we've got our authentication set up now. So we start coding, which is step code. So we're going to install Nuxt. If anyone's not done that before, there's a couple of ways to do it. They have this way they sort of show you this way to do it, which is like a sort of a wizard way. Installs like a ton of stuff that's probably really confusing to most people. I mean, I did this the other day, and been using Nuxt for years on like tons of stuff, and even I was like, "What is half this shit?" So I don't.
Sorry, Drew. Can you zoom in again?
Oh yeah, sorry. Keep reminding me.
Keep going. That's good.
Yeah, so don't do this, I don't think, yet. Try this other way, and then once you kind of get a better idea of like what it is Nuxt does, go to that wizard. In the meantime, we're going to install it from scratch. So, little known thing, it's very easy to do, and you only need 2 files to do it. So, create a directory, which I already did. I made the directory. I'm going to make a file in here. I'm going to call it package. Not JSON.
You definitely need to zoom in there. That's like impossible to see.
Okay, I don't know how we're going to do this. You're not gonna, I can zoom this.
That's better. Yeah, that's.
So you're not gonna,
oh, but yeah, the side. Okay, yeah, that's fine. It is what it is.
Yeah. Unless is there a way to do it? Is there a way to do it in Zoom? Probably not.
It has the word Zoom in it. You would think it does. I don't know.
Okay, well,
don't worry about it. That's fine. That frankly, you can go a little smaller down the text. And you're right. The sidebar you're not going to be able to do, and there's nothing to do about it. It's fine. Okay. That's fine.
Cool. So we're going to call it Vue.js LA demo. I don't think you can have spaces in here, but and that's it. Cool. So we do that. We want to make this is actually all you need for now to install. Oh, I'm going to get my calendar right here. To install Nuxt, we want to just run, I'm just following these instructions. Install, oh, no, didn't like that. npm install Nuxt. That's going to do it. Some of this will take a little bit. We're going to end up with like a whole sort of thing in the middle.
By the way, it is cool to see this because I used the Create Nuxt app, and I had no idea you could do it this much you're right. There's just so much stuff in there, and I had no idea you could do it this way. So it's nice to see as well.
Yeah, I just worried that everyone's going to get bored while this stuff sort of installs, but we'll get there. So anyway, this is the next step. Is we're going to get a Nuxt config file. I don't think it makes that. We're going to make that in a second. We'll see. Cool. So we made that. Now we want to make a Nuxt config file, which really doesn't need to have anything in it to begin, but I'm going to take it from here to start. I'm just going to go to, like, you could just do this to begin with, right? Mode. This is all you would need to start. So Nuxt has two modes, universal and SPA. I'm not going to wait. We don't have time to kind of go through all of that. Just go with universal for now. And we need some sort of Nuxt modules that we'll get to in a minute. I'll explain what those are. Cool. And that's Nuxt installed, but there's no way for it to show anything. So you would want to create a new folder called pages. This is Nuxt's way of setting up a router. You don't need to define any routers or routes in Nuxt. It just does it off the file structure. So you create one called pages, and then you end up with a file. Let's call this, well, we're going to start with a login route, right? So login.view, and this is just a Vue template. And I'm going to put h1 hello world for you, like this, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to be this verbose. We're going to start copying and pasting stuff to speed this up, but this is it. So if I now run npm run dev, this is going to start serving up Nuxt, and you get this little Nuxt also ends up on this little localhost on every page. So localhost, sign up, oh, login. Hello world, that's it. So that's the beauty of Nuxt. We didn't have to define a router, and now we have it, it's working.
Beautiful.
So I'm gonna keep going here. Now we're gonna want to store data, right? So if you use Vue before, there's Vuex, which is Vue's version of like a data storage. To do that in Nuxt, all you need is a folder called store, and then every file inside of store becomes a Vuex module just automatically. The default one is called index.vue or index.js. And now it's just empty, but now I have Vuex set up and working. I just need to define a state, which looks kind of like this. And we're going to want to store a user and some authentication tokens. So that's our default store. So now if I look at my inspector, I already have a Vuex store. I didn't have to config anything, just made a file. Nuxt is fantastic at that. So that's, now we have a store and a router set up by creating a couple of directories. The next thing we want to do is get ready to query some data. Now, this is something that most things will skip over, but in the real world, you're going to want to control environment variables for what those URLs are. I'll show you like sort of where this sort of comes from first, I guess, to give you some context. So we're going to want to install Apollo, which is GraphQL's that's like Axios, the HTTP library. The GraphQL, like first citizen, is Apollo. So I'm just going to close all these so that you guys can follow what we're on. So if I'm in my Nuxt config file, I want to add Apollo in here. This is the Apollo config. These cookie attributes I set, these match the expiry times and everything for authentication tokens from Apix. So you can just use those. We're going to want to create this config file. for Apollo, like, so it knows the URL. So we're gonna go, it's called, we're gonna create a plugin, new file, .js. And what that looks like is plugins. It's just a simple URL, right? So ordinarily, you could just put the URL to the 8-base backend here, but you'd be hard coding it, which in the real world is not really, you should never really do that most of the time, because you want to sort of be able to switch it around on different servers for staging and production, and you don't really want to have that end up in like a public repo, for example. So where you get the 8-base backend from is here, endpoint URL. So that would go there ordinarily. But because we don't
This is super important stuff, by the way. It seems like it's like not sexy, but I'm glad you're covering this.
Yeah, I'm trying to really do this as like what you would actually do in the real world. So we want to make a new file called .env. And I've got an example here that you would normally just sort of clone. And you put that here. And you kind of want to end up with these two endpoints. This auth profile one, we're going to use in a minute. And that one comes from app services, authentication, this ID here. That's all you sort of need to connect, or 0. So that's an env file. And we've got Apollo now set up here. So to use an env, we need to install the .env module. Look, I'm going back to sort of like my, this here. You want to install this, right? So we're going to just do that now. Install the .env module. And part of that installation instruction for that is we need a build modules config, which looks like this here, and this just goes in here. Cool. So now we have environment vars set up, and that just works if we do this. So what this is here, what this does is imports the environment vars from your env file into Nuxt, because Nuxt allows you to sort of set your own here. Like you could do like a Nuxt var here. And so this just kind of like takes the ones from this file and puts them into Nuxt. I'm actually missing a little step here that would, I'll show you right now. Module. You need there's a little gotcha here. It's like tucked away at the bottom. Thank you. That's got to go there. Cool. So now we've got environment vars working.
So if I may for a sec, Drew, I just want to make sure we're following what's happening with env, because it's just like a concept that again gets kind of like skipped over with like simple to do apps. Basically, if you didn't do this, if you had hard coded what you're looking at right there, these like URLs into show where you would have
oh yeah, so if I just put it in here as a regular string, right?
Exactly. Instead of that, instead of that, there you go. Perfect. So if you had done it this way, then basically this Apollo config, can I see the window for a sec? This Apollo config default, that would get actually stored in your when you made a commit in Git, it would be stored there. And then your URL or any kind of information that you don't want to be seen is actually getting stored into Git, and that means you're saving it over and over again, and it just makes it eventually more publicly accessible. When you put things in an env file, it kind of first of all, you usually git ignore the .env. Is that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
assume you're doing
I
that?
haven't got to the
Yes.
git ignore bit, but yes.
Okay, but it's basically telling Git, don't save this secret information. That's what
Yep.
this all comes down to. And then the way that you deal with it is you have to actually log into your server and put that same URL somewhere else, or whatever it is that you want. You actually like put that in directly in the server, but it's not something that's
Yep.
exposed in Git.
Yeah. So
So
what Kobe's sort of getting at there is like if you're deploying to like Heroku, this is just like a website we've been working on at Funkhouse. You'll have environment variables here, right? And this is the GraphQL endpoint for this website. So this is the like a staging website, and if I'm in like production, I'll have a different URL for that, which actually I won't here because this website is not live yet, but you could. So you'd have different backends powering different stuff. And it would be impossible to do that here without a lot of like logic that would be weirdly hard coded into a file that shouldn't be there. So that's the whole point of environment variables. It's a variable dependent on what environment you're running this in. So anyway, that's now that. Cool. So back to, go away. Okay. Back to our little instruction list. So we've got .env working. We've set up Apollo. I've added this. I have not installed it. So we need to install Apollo, Nuxt Apollo. This is a version of, it's basically Vue Apollo, but made to work in Nuxt. I like it, but also hate it. There's some stuff, the error handling is really bad, which you'll find out in a minute.
I like how you described this as kind of like, if you guys think in the RESTful world, if we use fetch, or sorry, I just blanked. What's the name of it?
Axios.
Or Axios, or any other thing that we usually make our get and post requests. Apollo is kind of like, speaking in the language that I can't talk right now. What's the
GraphQL?
we're using now? I just blanked. Thank you. What GraphQL is. So that's basically the GraphQL version of the rest of those.
Yep. So we need to add Nuxt to the modules of Nuxt, which looks like this. We're going to get to what that is in a bit. So we've got build modules. Doesn't matter what order these go in. Just make this syntax look better. Cool. Cool. That's it. We're going to use FileStack to upload the files. So I'm just going to install that now, and we'll get to what that does in a minute. All right, so as that's installing, I'm gonna, okay, cool. So now npm run dev, and then, cool. Great thing about Nuxt too is you get these like cool little building stuff. Cool. So let's start building some templates. So you can't see this, but I'm going into pages, and I'm creating a page called signup.view, and template. And I'm just going to put, so you guys can see it working, h2, sign up. Sign up, done. So now we're in the Vue world. To anyone that's new to Vue on this meetup, this is a Vue template that is being used by Nuxt, which is sort of just like a framework for Vue templates, essentially. You can close out of this. Cool. I got that. This was creating a store to storage, which you saw me do already in store index. Cool. So we want to kind of like build a form here to handle the sign up stuff. I've just built a really basic one already. So I'm just going to take this form template here, and then I'll show you all the stuff that we wire up here. Let me just make this a little smaller. Cool. So this is just a template, giving it a surrounding thing. So this is how you do a form the right way. You have a onSubmit method, which we're going to build in a minute. Submit.prevent is the way to do it. These are just regular inputs. To anyone new to Vue, this is how you build a Vue template. If you're from React, this would look like HTML to you, which is kind of the whole point. It's really easy to do. We're going to get, I don't know, I don't want to get too granular on like what V model, and like this is Vue's way of binding an input to data that we're going to collect. If anyone's really confused by that stuff, just speak up and I'll go into it, but I'll just assume that you kind of like know the basics of like this, or if not, you should just look up the Vue documentation on this kind of stuff. It's really easy. Placeholder and type, that's all this HTML stuff required, it's true. We got a little error thing we're going to get to in a minute, and a sign up button. That's it. So let's build out this onSubmit method. What happens when I actually onSubmit? I'm just going to do this log submitted so you can see it. Cool. Updated there. So wait, let me zoom in here. We're going to get a whole bunch of errors because I don't have a V model. But if I click this, oh, I get some basic browser-like stuff. And I would have got a submitted. There we go. Cool. So now let's collect the data that we want, which goes in data, return. We want to collect email. The default is empty. We want to collect password. Default is empty. Oh, password. Default is empty. And loading. We want to track if we're like submitted this data or not. So loading by default is false. Cool. So I'm just going to shift reload this. What other errors we're getting here? Error is not defined because I want to collect the error at some point as well, which will be, well, let's go with false for now. Cool. And now no errors. Perfect. Cool. So that's, you know, what we do. So basically at this point we want to like, I'm just going to pseudocode what you want to do here. You want to make what they call a mutation, is a GraphQL word for essentially like a post request. If you're coming from the REST world, we're sending data to the server to like mutate data on the server. We want to make a mutation to sign up a user. That's
not to be confused with the term mutation within the Vue ecosystem.
Correct. So we want to make a mutation to the sign up. So I'll put that here. GQL mutation to a sign up user. Then we want to, you know, on success, we log in user and route to, you know, a protected page, right? Like the user, let them do stuff. This is a little habit that I do when building out these things, is just kind of like pseudocode out what you're trying to do. I think it's a good habit to get into. Cool. So going back to our little instructions here, the best way to do this, you could just like go and put like a whole Apollo, which you access this way, by the way. Apollo mutation in here and like do all this logic and have this giant sort of method here to handle this all. But the better way to do this kind of stuff is with store actions. So what that kind of looks like, if I go into my store, you kind of want to do this sort of stuff. This is what you want, not kind of, this is what you should do.
Just to be clear, now you're talking about Vuex store actions.
A Vuex store action.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about, now we're back in the Vue ecosystem. We're using the store in the Vue ecosystem called Vuex. And once he stores that locally, that will then use GraphQL to kind of, instead of post the data, I guess you're mutating the data.
Yeah, so I'll put this in pieces so that we can follow what's going on. First thing first is in our store that we've made, which is this one, was define some actions, right? So in a Vuex store, there's like two sort of things you need to understand. You have actions, and then you have Vuex mutations. A action can be asynchronous. So like generally it takes some time to happen because you're like sending something to the server. Whereas a mutation is you actually making a modification to the local state on your computer and it's instantaneous. You cannot do asynchronous actions from a mutation, which you've used a Vue template before is a commit, like this.store.commit. That has to be synchronous, like it has to happen instantly. So if you want to do something to then do a commit, you have to use an action. So let's do a user sign up action. Cool. So this is how you do a user sign up action. This is essentially payload. You can pass anything you want in this parameter. And then this is actually the Nuxt context. So you can get what you want out of Nuxt, and we just want to use commit, which this is the same as like in a template, store dot.
Well, you'd said the Nuxt
context.
I would call that the Vuex store context.
Oh yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if there was.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's the same. I'm sorry. Yeah. So in a template, you would do this, but in an action where this is local to this action, not to like the whole like view thing that's going on. You would import the commit function and do it like this, right? So again, let me just log this out so you can sort of see an action going on. All right. So that's an action going on. Now back in my sign up route, what I want to do here is this dot store dot dispatch the name of this action, which is user sign up. Now I just do them in all caps. Everyone kind of has their own convention with the payload in here. So let's just put like a hello in here, right? So I could go back in here and payload this here. Cool. So now when I click the submit button, it's going to throw up this, dispatch this Vuex action, which will come here and run this. So you'll see that in a second. Oh, there we go. So that is a core thing to understand. But let's say I wanted to like actually commit something to my local store. I would need to do what's called a mutation, a Vuex mutation. So the way to do that, again, I've got it sort of pre-set up here, but I'm gonna just copy it in interest of speed. Define mutations. So I've got two here. It's pretty easy. They always take two parameters. The current state, which is essentially just this object, gets put in here, and then the payload. So if you wanted to save this payload to the user object, you would do, you'd want to do commit, the name of the commit. So let's say set user, and then the payload. And that's it. So now if I go here, look at my store, and I actually do that, I've now updated user to say hello. So that is the right flow for how to do put something into the store. That's the way you should do it. If there's some asynchronous stuff involved, which we're about to do now. You can just do a straight commit if there's no asynchronous stuff going on, like you just wanted to, I don't know, do a basic to-do app. But most of the time, you're going to want to do it this way. So here, this is where we will now, this is where we would do the Apollo mutation here. So that's going to look like this. Cool. So this is how you get the Apollo client. Now, all of this is documented on Nuxt Apollo here, so you guys can follow it. And I'm just sort of loosely explained it here. We've done all the setup, so you can just kind of see like the different ways to access the different sort of, they call it Apollo client. That's like the thing you use to make the sends. So, you know, here's how you do it in a method. Here's how you do it in an action, like all these different ones. So we're going to do it in an action, and this is how you get it. Cool. So now we have the Apollo client, and really at this point, you could just do this, right? So this is an asynchronous JavaScript function. It's going to await on this Apollo client to do this thing. Now I'm going to explain what this thing is, but that's how you do it. And then the result, you know, would be this. This would give you whatever came off the server. So now we need to figure out what it is we're trying to send to the server. So that's where we come into our handy little API Explorer, and we want to do a mutation to, these are all the mutations we can do on the server's data. We want to sign up a user with a password. So it goes in here and it gets built here, and I can delete this other one. So here's all the things that you can do with the required field and stuff. Obviously we need the password, and we're going to want an email. You can see it all coming here. This is the purple bit, is the sort of fields. We could like give a name and all these other things when we sign up, but we're just going to do email and password to begin with. And then when we get it back, the response back, what do we want back? We want an email, and we want the user ID. When you're doing any kind of GraphQL stuff, you always want the ID pretty much in everything that you do. There's a bunch of like caching that Apollo does, and it relies on these IDs to kind of like know what those are. So just always ask for the ID at the very least. Cool. And at every level too, like if you're getting a post that has comments, you want the ID for the post and the ID for the comments, and you'll see that. We're going to get into it. Cool. So that's what we want to do. So what we would want is somehow we want to get that data in here somehow, which there's ways to do it like this. It's called GraphQL tag, and we'll show you how to do that later. But I think the best way to do it is to import it as a file from a GraphQL directory so that we can do things like this. User sign up. So you see this? So this is just, I just copied this and put it in here and changed the name of it. That's it. So it's very easy to just be like, I want this, copy this, paste it in here, done. How you pass in variables to this, by the way, this is GraphQL again. Say I want a password to get into this rather than like hard coding it in here. You just define like, it's like function parameters, right? And you have to, it's very type sensitive, so you have to tell it what type it is, string. And if I want, oh, here we go. Yeah, and it warns me, it's like, I've put it here, but I haven't used it. So I put it here. And then I can test it in the Explorer by putting it in here. Right? And then email would be a string. And if I want them to be required, like I'd like this to throw an error if I don't put them in, you put a little exclamation point at the end of them. That's how you pass in vars, and that's what I've done here. And you also need to include the auth profile ID, which is that environment variable that we got from services. Well, we got from the auth profile setup stage here. So we're going to pass that in through the environment variable in a minute. But anyway, so that's how you sort of do this. Now, these will get really complicated as you go, like what kind of types they are, because GraphQL has like lots of types. So you'll see here, if you click on this, it'll tell you the types it wants. So you could pass in a whole user object instead of just the email. Like you can pass in this whole thing, like all of this. If I wanted to sign up like with a name and company and all the other stuff, you could pass in a whole object, and it tells you like what that object can be and stuff. So if you're going to do that, this tells you like what types they need to be declared as. It's really handy. Anyway, okay, so this is the GraphQL template for our user sign up mutation. So I'm going to create a folder called GQL. This has nothing to do with Nuxt. I just made this up. And then inside that, I'm going to create another folder called mutations. And I'm going to create a file called user signup.gql. And I'm going to paste in this, which we get here. Cool. So now we just need to, rather than like pasting a whole bunch of like template language into a store, I can just import it, which is just a regular, like it's the same regular import. This can be whatever you want, but sort of a convention for this sort of stuff is to use all caps for these so that you can sort of know that this doesn't map to a var somewhere else. You know it's coming from here. And then it's just from. Nuxt has like a handy little shortcut to get the root. It's either tilde or at, depending on if you're in CSS or not. Tilde seems to work the best across all things, so I just use it for everything. And then it's GQL, mutations, user sign up. Cool. So that's how you would do a mutation there.
Drew, can I pause you just for a
Yeah,
sec? I feel like there's just like so many different things being covered right now. Does anybody in the group have anything that they want to ask real quick? I feel like it's
a lot.
I mean, we're learning a ton, but it's also, there's like a lot of assumptions that we know GraphQL and Vue and then Nuxt on top of that, etc. So if people have specific questions that are holding them up from understanding everything, does anybody in the crowd, any questions? All right. So we can, no, we can't hear you. Can you speak up?
Yeah, I was curious about the use. What exactly is Apollo? And how does that relate to GraphQL?
Yeah, so Apollo, here we go. GraphQL Apollo, right? So Apollo is a whole like server side and front end side of like sending GraphQL between the server and the front end. It's essentially, if you've used like Axios for HTTP, like REST APIs, think of it like this, but it's GraphQL centric. A lot of the times the server will run Apollo server, and so Apollo client kind of like connects to it in a nice way. Think of it like you could fully just do a you know, like a regular like HTTP like fetch to this endpoint, and you will get back, like, just look at it like, right, like if I do this in my network inspector, you'll see. Actually, I'm gonna not make a whole bunch of fake users here. Cool.
I just, maybe it's helpful. I think we're making the assumption, and I was too, that everybody knows how they get data from the server. Typically, you can use either fetch or what are the other ones?
So, yeah, so like fetch is a built-in like HTTP method for getting data from the server. The other one is Axios. That's very, very common. It's a library.
Yeah, Axios is the one that a lot of the front end frameworks use. So basically, like if your client, let's say your browser, if the code in there wants to go get data from your server, you're either using fetch or some other tool that you're kind of asking the server for that data.
Yep.
Right. And so
and the data,
again, that's Axios. So that's what we're talking about. Anyway, so this is kind of like if you need to do so instead of get request, post request, etc. If you need to do it in kind of GraphQL language, you use Apollo.
Correct. You don't have to use Apollo. You could use Axios too. You just get data back looking like this, right? And it's you know, it's kind of formatted in a GraphQL way that Apollo is kind of expecting. So that's what Apollo does. Does that explain it a little bit?
Yeah, it's much helpful because I use fetch all the time, you know, and Axios, I've been hearing about it, but fetch works out fine, so I just stick with it.
Yeah.
And now,
yeah. I think Fetch is actually built into the browser and a little more recent. So the Axios kind of preceded that. That's why a lot of people just talk in Axios, but Fetch is totally the exact same thing.
So this is kind of the best pattern for making a really any kind of request. Like this could be a REST request. But you want to do these like sort of try catch blocks. I've found, especially with GraphQL. The thing about GraphQL too that is the errors can get very confusing and not super intuitive. It's just kind of like a little bit by nature of GraphQL because it'll error out on like you've requested a piece of data from an object that doesn't exist and like it doesn't. So this is just sort of go with me on this. This is the best way to do it. I found.
And this is assuming you know what async functions are in JavaScript. And I mean, for example, finally when I learned promises, async came around. But this I assume is kind of like a dot then.
Yeah.
Try.
Yeah. Try catch is essentially just think of try catch blocks as if this thing gives an error, it will immediately skip to this. So even if I had like do some stuff here, it would never do that stuff. And so instead of like crashing your whole app, it will catch it here. Normally you wouldn't want to throw the error back from here because this would like, in this sort of scenario would like fail kind of silently, which I don't want because with a user sign up and a user login, you kind of want to know that the error happened, like wrong password. So we kind of want to like keep pushing the error back. I'd love to know a better pattern. If anyone I know John's probably sitting there being like,
I was just about to say, John will chime in with like the perfect pattern.
But yeah.
John, we're waiting.
Anyway, John, jump in if you got something to say. But anyway, cool. So these are us passing the variables to GraphQL. That's whatever this email here, which is coming from the form, whatever the password is, will end up in our GraphQL mutation template coming through as password or email. And we're pulling the authentication profile from our environment var so that we don't have to like edit this later on. It all comes from that env file here. It will be this number. And then we're returning the data here when we get it. So that now is a full user sign up action. Which will work. So what we want to do here then is in our sign up route, I'm just going to the one that I wrote earlier. I'm just going to sort of like do this slowly with all of you. So first thing we want to do is set like a little loading state so that we can like display like a little spinner when you're like doing something, right? Or prevent the button from being clicked 3 times and signing up the user 3 times or something weird like that. And we want to like reset an error in case there's been one previously. I'm sort of setting it to this, so we'll just make them match. And then we want to collect credentials from the form, which is these 2 here, which V model to the inputs here, so that we can, send those to the thing. So now that we have the credentials, we want to send them to the store, send them to our action, our Vuex action, like this, which we covered before. So this is going to our user sign up action, passing in those credentials. And if we get back an error, we want to set the error so that we can display something and then turn loading off, like we've finished doing our thing, and then like return, because right after this, we're going to want to log in the user. Unfortunately, with Apix, a sign up doesn't automatically log in a user, which just sucks.
Can I pause you for a second? I'm just surprised that you put the dispatch in a try. I guess I would have dispatched and then had the kind of the try language within the dispatch, but I guess anyway.
Well, yeah. So that I'm doing it in 2 places.
Can't hurt.
No, it's so that I can control the error coming out of the dispatch, right? Because if I didn't do that here as well, sorry, here as well, I wouldn't be able to log this error. I would have to log that error on the component. And if you end up having like 2 places to sign in, you kind of like end up duplicating a lot of stuff. But you could do that, Kobe. You could totally do that.
I just like that you did that. I just,
Yeah.
again, I was more just, oh, I'm going to use that.
It might make a little more sense once we get to this point. So let's just do this now, right? So what this should do is on submit, sign up a user. What did I do wrong here? This is the error. Cannot use outside of async. Async needs to be on here. Here we go. Cool. Okay. So we shouldn't get any errors here. Now, well, I'm going to actually deliberately cause it to give an error by not putting in a good enough password. It's 1, 2, 3. Cool. So now you're getting a little look at shitty error messages from Nuxt Apollo. So what we're looking at here is this error got caught in a store action here, sign up error, which is, I don't know if you can see that there, sign up error. That's what I got here. And the error, rather than being like sort of something we can use, it just gives you this, which sucks. Dig into this behind the scenes in your network tab, you can actually look at the direct response of the server, and you've got all this stuff, which actually tells you really what happened. Yeah.
So this is John here.
Yeah.
I know you were calling me out for best practices for handling errors in the try catch, and my response, I didn't realize my mic was off. My response is it kind of depends on what your API is. So from the store level, so I guess like starting from component to the store level, if you look at the component right now, you've got a try catch here. So you're catching an error that's being thrown from the store. Cool. All right. So that's from a view from the component level, right? Ideally, we're going to have some kind of normalized format of our errors, no matter if it's coming from GraphQL or from like a Google API or something. We've got some kind of like normalized error handling format that we can then just pass on to our view layer of like an error to display. From our store level, then, what I like to do, if you go to your like store.index.js, so if you normally transparently throwing your error in your catch is kind of like redundant and not really necessary.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to wrap this in a try catch. You can just do like, your await Apollo mutate. And like, if that fails, it'll throw the error. You don't need to explicitly say throw error. So, but what I do like to do is instead you catch that error, normalize it somehow so that the error from Apollo will look like the same error, like some kind of standard error format in your app.
Yeah.
Right, like if you just care about the error message and then maybe like a data payload to say what's invalid or something, some kind of way to normalize it. This is where I would normalize the error response and then throw that normalized error. And then also you don't need to say return false after that. Your thing ceases to execute once you throw the error.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so exactly, that's kind of what I had in mind. Like instead of this, you would do like a normalizing function. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So close enough. Thanks, John. That's good. Cool. So now we're back in our sign up route. If you saw before that I got like this weird sort of token error, and it's because every time you change an environment variable, you really should restart the Nuxt dev server. Otherwise, because those variables get injected on build. So I just restarted it to reconnect the auth profile ID here. All right, so here we go. Should throw an error. Perfect. Auth token invalid. Well, and you can see like it's coming back here, right? Okay, well, that's gonna really trip me up, team. I'm gonna find them. Oh, It's going to an old. Hang on, sorry guys. I think I might have got my environment vars wrong. Is that 9.0? It's like trying to connect to like a different one. 9.0, that is the right one. Settings. Is the right one here? That's the right one. Oh. There we go. Password isn't strong. No, no, no. Sorry, guys. That. Is anyone catching what I'm doing wrong here? Because it's actually trying to connect to my to like a different project altogether. Nope.
Try clearing local storage. You might have an authentication token in there from another auth session.
Oh, I totally do. I definitely do. Okay. I definitely do. This will probably log me out of yeah, this should log me out of. This will log me out of Apix, but it's okay. Like, perfect. All right, we're just going to continue in a private window team, unless that worked again. No. All right, private window it is. Okay. Cool. All right, let's just continue. Cool. See what the response comes back. Password is too weak. Cool. So that's excellent. the real thing. Cool. So sort of recapping here so everyone can pick up where I left off. Sign up a user. Now, once that goes through, which we'll do right now so that you can see it in action, you would set the password strength like parameters in Auth0. So I'm just going to do password capital 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. And you will see that this comes through successfully. Oh, so it worked. So now if I sign into Apix.
Good job.
It'll work. It's actually still logged in here. Yeah, well, there you go. user there, and user here. No, different workspaces.
Awesome.
There we go. Cool. Okay. So now that we've signed up a user, we would want to log in a user. Right? That's how we do that here. So you kind of just do the same thing. So we've now got the pattern down. So this is the user login one. Yeah. There's a lot more to this, but I'm gonna show you now because we're gonna store our token. So in our store, I'm going to put this in here. Cool. So what that's doing is the same thing, getting a polo. We're committing a user login mutation, and it's just, I'll explain that in a second. We need the same sort of credentials. Thanks to John, no, we don't need that now. So what try catch will do is, if this is successful, it will start running this code next. If it's not successful, it will throw the error. So the next thing we want to do is store our tokens so that we can make authenticated requests in the future.
Store them locally now in your
Both,
using
yes.
Vuex Store to your browser.
Yes, so we can store them locally into Vuex Store, which is what this would do. There's the regular token, which we need to make requests, and then there's a refresh token, which we can use in a few days to like get a new token without having to have the person log in again. Now, we're not going to handle deal with the refresh token in this scenario. They're just going to have to log in once a day. But that's how.
It's a good pattern.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned.
This is how you set the token to Apollo, so that Apollo kind of puts that in a cookie and keeps it itself, which was why I was getting that error before, because it's like kept it. I don't know. It's because I'm doing it all off localhost, so the cookies are locked to the domain, so that's why that was happening. But yeah, so this is how you tell Apollo, I want this cookie, this token from now on. So you kind of set it in two places, one for the refresh token, one for Apollo. We wouldn't actually need this, but it's just sort of good habit to keep it there in case you need it for some other reason in the future. So that's what that's doing. Then now that we've got like our token set, we can actually make authenticated requests. And because the user login mutation doesn't actually give you back user data in Apix, you need to make another request to get the user. But you have to kind of do this sequentially, like log me in, get my token, then get my user data. And so we dispatch another event, like a Vuex action can emit another or dispatch another action. So you can do like action to commit. So that's what we do here. And this one's much simpler because all we want is the data back. We don't need to like process anything. So that's a user get action that I wrote as well, which I'm going to take from here, which looks like this. Sorry. So I'm now back in my store. Save it there. So this goes down here, does another mutation. Oh, this would actually be a query. My bad. And that would be query user get. There we go.
So query is basically just a get?
Query is just ask the service for data and it gives you back. You don't have to like modify anything on the server.
Got it.
And that's a query. Cool. So that runs, gets the data, returns the data here. And so that comes out there, and then we save it and we commit it to the store. So I haven't actually put any of these GraphQL templates, so those will cause problems. So I kind of want to grab those from here. User login goes in here. New folder, query, new file, user login.gql. User login. It's a good convention to name all of these things the same so that you can find them easier later. By looking at the inspectors, you'll be like, oh, I need this user sign up with password. All right, well, I just look for the user sign up, you know. There's an Apollo inspector for Chrome that kind of works like the Vue dev tools. It's really handy too if you're going to really get into this. So anyway, so user login, user sign up. Oh, that's goes in. User login goes in mutation, and user goes in here. New file. User.equal. Cool. And install. And copy these into my store. Now that I have all of them, user get, queries, user get. Just make sure I did that right. User get. Perfect. Okay, that should do it. I'll sign up a user. Password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it's because my sign up. This is grayed out because I didn't complete my sign up logic. So I'm just gonna speed it up here. Grab my sign up template and put it all here. So what we're doing here is signing up the user, logging in the user, and then redirecting them to, now that at this point they're fully signed in and authenticated and everything. And we're going to push them to an authenticator route, which I haven't built. So we'll just make one real quick. So home.view template. Cool. And then reset my loading conditions and stuff like that. Cool. So let's create a user. Takes a little bit of time. You'd want to show a little spinny wheel here if that was all doing its thing. Logged in. Look at our Vue store. Tokens, user. Logged in.
Awesome.
So first real problem that you'll find here is you go, oh, okay, I want to refresh and lose all my user data because we didn't save anything persistently. Now, Apollo stores its token in a cookie, but that doesn't help us in terms of displaying data on the page. So really the next thing you're going to want to do is figure out how to persist your state. And that is covered here. Get the user data, did that. I think of it, here we go. Now would be a good time to persist your user data. I'm going to cover the protected route in a second. So you want to use this package to do that. It's super easy to set up. We just run install it like this. I'll do it real quick. And you need to add the module as well. It's just shown here. So I'm going to grab that from my module Vuex. I'm going to explain what this does in a second. Take this whole thing.
Are the Nuxt version of these different than the non-Nuxt version? Like they've got the Vuex local store.
Yeah, they're Nuxt modules. They're a little different. Yeah.
Okay.
So Nuxt Vuex local storage gets this working. So what you can do, there's all kinds of config for this, but what this is doing is saying, I want the user and the token objects in my state to be persisted in local storage. And then this little thing will turn it into development mode or not, depending on if you're in production or not. And basically that encrypts the store or not encrypts the store. So this is a good little trick to get it working. Cool. So now that we have that, I'm going to close all these so you can kind of see. Now it would actually remember stuff when I log in. It'll remember what goes into the store. So run dev. Let's get the little our sign up page working, because I don't have a sign up page now. I created the user, but I can't sign in. Okay, so I want a login page. So I'm going to just take the login page from before, and it's very similar. It's very similar. You know, it's like a form with some inputs, a button, loading errors. Same thing, credentials. I just can commit that user login. So now that's the whole reason why you want these as store actions, right? So I don't have to have this logic in both components. And when I log in, I go to the home route. Cool. So now, if I go to sign in, well, this is yeah, sign in, log in. Cool. So now if I sign in with my Drew at Funkhouse, password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Logged in. So you can see here in my store that if I hard reload the page, it's still there. Although the token isn't, but the user is. Probably because I'm not sure fully why that is, but half of it's working. It's good enough for now. It's good enough for now. Log in. Okay, cool. So the problem is that I could also just go to this page, right? Like it works because I have my Apollo is authenticated and stuff. But it'd be really nice if like I went in another private window that I couldn't go to that page. So that's a protected route is what we need. And it's really easy to do. It's got it here. We just make a file, a directory called middleware. This is a Nuxt thing. So if I'm in here, I make a directory called middleware. I make a file called authenticated. Whatever the file name of this becomes the name of the middleware. And so then on each page, so like for example, the home page that I want to be protected, I can just add that to it. And what we will do is it won't let me get to this page unless this middleware has run. So the middleware, surprisingly simple. I'll explain this. This is the middleware. Actually, I don't need that there. This is the middleware that you want to use. Basically, we look to see if Apollo has a token. This is just mentioned on the documentation for Nuxt Apollo. If it has a token, we assume that you're able to see a route. Ideally, you'd want to test that beyond just like the presence of a token, but this is pretty good for like, you know, first attempt at it.
Just to be clear, middleware is like a specific to Nuxt thing, right?
Yep, it basically doesn't let you, if you return out of this middleware, you won't be able to see the page that this middleware relates to. So we're going to redirect.
But just the whole concept of like the middleware on the front end is not part of Vue per se. It's
a
definitely
Nuxt
like
router
Nuxt
thing, yeah. So this is how we, like, if you don't have a token set, we're going to kick you to the login page every time. So just, yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, so just to sort of recap what we did there, as I made a directory called middleware, added in our authenticated middleware that just checks for the token. And then on the pages that I want protected, I just add a prop called, a config thing here called middleware. And that's it. So now you won't be able to get to that page unless you've got a token. Cool. So, like if I went to this, it's because my token isn't, I need a new private browser. I'm home, logged in, authenticated. Let's close this one. Anyway, I think there's some weird stuff going on with my my tokens. So let's just sign out here. Let me copy my home thing here so we can actually sign out as well. That'd be the next thing that we should build anyway, and then it'll all sort of click. So this is my whole homepage. Cool. So just what I'm doing here is building a logout button. So what we do here is we go to logout. I've got another store action called logout. I go to my store action. Grab this from here. Essentially, we just want to clear the tokens and redirect you to the homepage. So it's pretty simple. Store. So on logout, we remove the token from Apollo and then just clear our store for anything that we want. So that's that. So now when I get a logout button, yes, because I skipped ahead. Let's turn off this sign up button. User posts. Yep, I don't want those things either. There's a lot to go with this, so we'll just skip over this. I missed something. It's because I'm doing a bunch of stuff. Sorry, team. All right, so here we go. It's tokens. Log out here. Cleared my tokens. Now I can sign in again. Anyway, so that's how, there's a lot to it, guys, I know, but that's how you do log in, log out, sign up, all that.
It's great, Drew. Thank you.
There's a lot to it. How are we all feeling for time? Because at this point, we can create like records and then deal with custom functions, which is like making server-side stuff on 8-base, or I can skip the sort of like mutation part.
Skip it and do something in particular, or?
Oh, I would skip the like creating a record on in 8-base and just deal with the custom function, like deploying custom server-side code.
Anybody have preferences?
So, anyone still on the feed?
Everyone's, yeah, people are here.
I think Andrew in the chat room prefers custom function.
Okay.
I'm up for whatever.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll get into that. Let me just.
Okay, I got a few people said custom functions.
Okay,
so
cool.
Let's do that.
Feel free to dig into the example thing just to see how you can like put data on the server. And there's a whole thing about file stack, uploading files there that it will be helpful too. All right, cool. So let's just, so basically we got to here. We would create a post, list out all the posts, and that's it. And part of this would be file stack. So let me show you the backend stuff. Cool. Backend. It's linked here. Backend code is here. All right. So what we want to do all right. Okay. All right. So we made a post and we made some likes. Now, what if we wanted to put some like limitations around who is allowed to like something, or make sure that you can't like a post twice? You know, you can do that through the data layer by some of these things, like you know, don't allow multiples, or you know, but if you want to do more complicated things, like in this scenario, we can't limit it to like just one. Like I can't just like hammer the like button on my own stuff, you know. There's no way to do that through the sort of native stuff of Apix. So we want to make our own custom server-side logic, and so that is sort of like it's shown here, and you can sort of see how it all works through logs and stuff. But how you actually write this function is through custom function codes. So the way that works is it's essentially like a lambda function that runs on AWS. That's what it is behind the scenes, but it's all sort of run through the 8-base kind of like system. So they're just sort of one purpose functions. Think of them that way if you're not familiar with like a lambda function, lambda function. And they run, the entry point for them is like you kind of define them, and I'll show you how to sort of make all this, but just as like a sort of context of it all. You define them in this 8base.yaml file. And so you say, I've got this custom function called likePost, and it's of type resolver, and we'll get into the different types it can be. And here's the file for it and the schema for it. And the schema only relates to resolvers, but we'll get to explain all that in a second. So what kind of functions can we have? They're explained here, but there's really four types. There's a resolver. Now the resolver is, think of the resolver as this. It's one of these things. These are resolvers. So if I like ask for a post, this is the post resolver. Now 8base has made a whole bunch of these automatically from the database, but what if I wanted my own one? Another way to kind of think of it is like, it's like a custom endpoint if you're coming from like a REST POV. So if I wanted to make my own one, I could. And it can be a query or a mutation, or you can even make subscriptions, all kinds of ones. But that's what a resolver does. And they're all sort of detailed on the 8-base docs here. There's webhooks. So these are custom functions that can be run from a URL. So if you ever needed to like connect some service to 8-base, this would be how you make a URL that can be accessible to another service. So these aren't really GraphQL related. They're just, like webhook URLs. So you end up with like a URL that looks like this. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put it here. You end up with a URL that looks like that. And so you can just like hammer that endpoint. So you'd want to like do that. I've not had to build a webhook yet, but that's how you do it. Triggers. So triggers are things that happen kind of on events, not like in a timing sense, more like before you put data in the database, or after you take data out of the database. So that's when triggers happen. And then tasks are scheduled, like, you know, run every hour or twice a day, or, you know, that kind of stuff, like cron jobs essentially. So that's the four kind of functions you can have. So I'm going to show you how to do a resolver because it's kind of the most complicated one. But even that, it's not really that complicated. So the best way to do this is you install the 8-base CLI. So actually going to just do this really quickly. I go make a new one, like new folder here. I'm going to call. Oh. Cool. And I'm going to add it to my. This is just cool. So I'm in here. I think I need. Let's just call it. I'm going to get my terminal into the right context. Okay, cool. I don't need that. Cool. I just needed to get my atom in the right context easily. Okay, so we install this, which I already did. You don't have to do it as a sudo, but that was the only way I could get it to work on my machine. So good old sudo. Don't do that, but it works every time. We want to, oh, maybe I do need that package file. Package.json. We want to install GraphQL because we're going to need it later. And this one later. This just allows us to use GraphQL language in their function files. Cool. So this is we just sort of ended up with the basic node little thing going on here. Cool. So we want to log into Apix using the CLI. Log into Apix. This sort of authenticates you to their servers. So it's pretty nifty. It opens a sweet little website for it. And if I'm logged in already, I don't have to do anything. It just works. Let me get this waiting for authentication. Cool. Done. Authenticated. Cool. So this is now sort of like scaffolding up like all the files that you need. So you can, at any point you can do like -H for help, and it will like list out all the things that you can do with whatever function you're looking at. But I know that this function here, server is just the folder it's going to be in, and sort of a convention is that you put your server functions in a folder called server. And .e is empty. If you don't put the e in it, it will like scaff out a whole bunch of examples for you. But I'm going to do that anyway. So which workspace do I want to connect it to? Because I have a bunch of different like 8-base workspaces. So I want to connect it to my Instaclone one. Cool. So now you'll see it made a server file and a bunch of different stuff, right? In here. And I've got no functions or anything. It just kind of like added what I needed in there. Cool. I want to move into the server directory. So now I'm sort of like in this folder here. And I'm going to generate a function template, just like scaffold up a function, which is what this does. The -S is what type of function I want it to be. So like I can make it TypeScript or JavaScript. If anyone's TypeScript out there, you can just put I think the default is TypeScript, but JS will make one called like post. So you'll see what it'll do in a second. It's going to, cool, boom. Your like function has been, so see this added this source thing, resolver, like post, a bunch of mock stuff and a file that it goes in, and we'll show. And you'll see it updated my YAML file now to point to those things. So it defined this as a custom function. So what's happening here is we end up with a handler, which looks like this. This is the like logic that we run server side. And it defines there now will be, if I deployed this, there would be a mutation called like post in here. I've already deployed it, but that's what that is. It wouldn't be there normally, but because I've already deployed what we're about to write, that's what it would do. And so we kind of want to build this out, right, is the idea. So how you do that is, this is like one I already wrote for you here. It's kind of like pretty well sort of explained here, but the what will really like unlock your like brain on this is any of these if I put an ID in here, right? I would get that ID by going event.data.id, right? And I can like console log it, and I'll show you how to get the output of that in a second. But I'm just going to like paste all this in, and we're just going to go through it slowly one at a time. Okay, so let's move this off the screen. So we've defined the name of it like post. This comes from the YAML file and the directory structure, which maps to logic. That's here, and you get logs of it when it runs in production too here. But this is all sort of matches, right? Like post, file names like post, handles called like post, in the schema like post. That's where that name comes from. Cool. Let me just console this. Okay.
And Drew, we're getting close to 8, so
speed it up.
I mean, yeah, just finish up this part.
This is the last bit. So
yeah, excellent.
Cool. I'm just going to close these so you know what we're looking at. Cool. So if I like console, what if I log out this ID, right? So you're essentially creating like a GraphQL resolver. So it needs to have a GraphQL schema that kind of like tells GraphQL like the structure of this object. That is the most foreign part. Like if you haven't done like this sort of stuff before, but this is essentially sort of saying what like parameters this resolver is allowed to have. So it's allowed to have an ID. It's of type ID, and the result is going to be what kind of result, and this is the result. It's funny. It makes more sense to me written kind of like this, but you got to extend the type with the mutation on it. So it's like this. So what we're going to do is return an ID, and the output is going to be just success, true or false every time, which you see here, right? Is like, and it only is like this. So this comes from this. So I could add more to this, and it would, you know, if I wanted different kinds of things here, I could do it. So the schema is sort of what sets up the allowed things. And all of this kind of maps to like these documentation here. So like it sort of self-documents as you write it, which is really cool. So once I've got the schema set up and I've got the handler set up like this, now I can run mock data through it. This is essentially like your way of sort of testing it. So if you look at your mocks, by default, you get this like request one. And it's just like, these are these two you don't really need these to begin with. They're just sort of default. But this would be like ID. Like what happens if I give this function ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I can run this now like this. So what this is saying is 8-base, run it locally. So run it from this local file. Run what locally? Run my like post resolver using mock data from the file request. So if I had a different file, like I wanted to mock up like what happens in a failed state or different kinds of states, like what if they put in a string? What if they, you know, what would happen? Then you can change these, right? So like up here I have, this one is fail and this is request. So like I didn't pass in the valid ID versus a valid ID. So that's what they do. So if I do that, watch what happens in my console. It now hits the server, runs it, and gives me all kinds of, it actually consoled out the ID here. And then like, it's no returned out here because I commented it all off. So I got it undefined. So that's how you kind of like iterate through these functions. So now you can just kind of like write something, mock, run it through with a mock, write something, mock, you know, that's how you do it. So like if I was really doing this, I would go into my database, pull out a real post ID from here, put it in here. And now I can run this with like in a real sort of context. And remember, it's authorized as my 8-base user. So it's actually hitting the API. So if you did like a ton of mutations or deletes and stuff here, you would actually delete it. That's something that 8-base is working on, is like a staging environment. You could just clone your workspace and have like a staging workspace and a live workspace, but they're building out a full like CI pipeline and stuff at the moment. So that's coming down the line. So anyway, I'll just skip through this real quick to finish up. So what I'm doing here, if I grab, is I'm actually going to do a query, which is what this is. This context.api.graphql request. It's coming out of this context that's passed in from 8-base. I'm actually doing this is essentially, think of it as like an Apollo query against 8-base to get a post, see if I've liked it before, and it's using this sort of GraphQL template. This is what GQL tag does instead of it being an external file. So it's all included. You could make that an external file, but I kind of wanted to show like another way to do it. So again, this is all I just copied this out of the API Explorer and just pasted it in here. See if I've liked it. If I've liked it, I return false, so I can't like it again. So I can't like mash the like button. I return an object. You kind of need them structured like this. It's just the way 8-base expects all sort of, well, GraphQL really returns sort of everything in a data object, because you could like do an error and stuff as well if you want to do custom errors. So it'll return there. If that doesn't happen, I will now actually go and create a like a real like, and allow it to happen by the API, do another mutation, and then return success if it worked or not. And that's it. So that's how you do that. So if I mock this now, that I had a real, I think this will actually work maybe. Well, I'll get a success or not success. True or false? Success, false, didn't work. Probably because the like thing I put in didn't work, but it ran through all of it. Because this has already been liked. I already liked this one. I put this one in here, mock. And then again. Now you can, if you don't invoke local, you just go invoke instead of invoke local, it will run the custom function from the server's code. So there you go, worked. So now if I look here, it'll just have made a like down here. That's it. Nice. So then I deploy it. 8-base deploy will actually deploy this code to the server. It does. There's no other. It would work. I wouldn't have to do anything. But let me, without breaking my server, let me just do that here so you can see what happens if I'm in this context here. Oh, I need to go into server, cd server. That's it. What I have noticed is this log only works, doesn't log from here. Like it has to be done through like the actual API, not through here. Anyway, that's it. Deployed, 14 seconds. Takes about a couple of minutes to actually make it out onto 8-base, but now that's it. So there's a lot there, guys. I know. Definitely, probably easier just to clone these two repos and kind of go through it on your own. Feel free to hit me up with any questions or start any issues or anything like that. That's it.
Awesome, Drew. Thank you so much. I feel like I want to open up I know we're kind of running a little late. Do we want to maybe take a question or two? Does anybody have any specific questions they want to ask? Why don't we go out of share screen mode, and then we can kind of all see each other for a sec. When people want to turn their cameras on for a second.
Yep. How do I view Zoom? Oh, here we go. Stop. There we go.
There we go. Anyway, did anybody have any specific questions? Any thoughts?
Crickets.
Oh, we covered a lot. Plus, everyone's on mute, so they might be talking.
There's one question someone was asked about REST and GraphQL. What's the difference?
Between which?
I'm curious about it too. Is GraphQL different from REST, as in SOAP, as in HTTP request?
Yeah, it's way different. There's no, like with REST, you have all these different endpoints. With GraphQL, you just have one URL, and then you make different requests to that URL, and the answers come back from those resolvers that I said. So your server defines a whole bunch of resolvers, and your request to the server for information or to make a mutation runs through those resolvers. So you don't have like all these different endpoints. But I've actually given a couple of talks at past few meetups about what exactly GraphQL is. But the big difference and like why you want to use GraphQL is that the response payload is fully like customizable at the time of request. So like maybe the best way to see it is in this Explorer. Like, with the REST API, if you ask for user, you're going to get the entire user object. Even if you only want like their name, you're going to get everything. And so your payload sizes are like massive. Whereas with GraphQL, like if I wanted to get like...
We're not seeing your screen if you're showing us stuff right now.
Oh, I was about to show you. Yeah. Hang on, I'll do it real quick. If you were going to request, let's say, for all posts, this is the response from a GraphQL server, right? It's what I've asked for. So if like I don't want the caption, it won't give me the caption. So it's super efficient. Insanely efficient.
So instead of getting all the data for every single post by default, which is the way it works in REST, you get only the data you ask for.
Yeah, like
that's basically what REST would look like. The way you've got everything checked, right? I mean, you can obviously change your response, but you basically get the entire object, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what REST would do. And so like you can imagine if this was like the equivalent REST API, what's this, like 50 endpoints, and this is all like through one thing and all comes automatically from Apix because it just like maps to the database like instantly. So it's, yeah. And you get all these tools that are like, this kind of thing would be really hard to like build with the REST, like into the REST thing, I think. And it comes with every GraphQL stuff. So it maps to the database really well. Plus there's caches really well because essentially, well, it does that. REST can do that too, but it essentially like kind of like breaks all these out into a Apollo cache, and you can like inspect it pretty well. But yeah, does that answer your question, kind of?
It gave me a better perspective. I'm wondering if the people in the chat that asked that question have anything.
I couldn't quite hear that. Did anyone else get it?
I think he kind of asked the question to have somebody else. So I think we got some of it.
Yeah. I was asking on behalf of Andrew in the chat.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a good little example of like REST is like crazy information, and then GraphQL is just like just what you want. So not over fetching or under fetching is the big advantage, I think.
Awesome. I'm going to try to unmute everybody for a sec, or if everybody would unmute yourself real quick. I just want to say thank you, Drew. This is awesome. There's like so much that was covered here. both essentially how to build an entire app on the front end using Nuxt and how to, basically design a database from the back end using 8-base. And that happens to also be, not RESTful. And anyway, there's just like so much that was covered. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And we have these two repos here that you guys can clone, and I'm sure we're recording this all right now, so you guys can probably rewatch it all if you want to play along, next time around.
Yeah, I know there was a lot covered there, but really, we kind of like cloned the main part of Instagram in 2 hours. So I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, it's certainly enabled us at Funkhouse to do some shit that like we wouldn't be able to do really, like to build a whole like infrastructure around that. And I don't even need to really handle servers or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I can't talk highly enough for like what 8-base let us do. So if guys are out there like looking to build like an application fast, like I can't kind of imagine a quicker way really.
I do want to say, especially if there's any beginners in the room right now for Vue, that this isn't just advanced. This is like 4 or 5 different advanced concepts on the cutting edge of like all the different stuff that's happening in the development world. So aside from a front end framework like Vue, you're doing it with a kind of a framework on top of that called Nuxt, where there's just a lot of assumptions that you know what you're doing. And he built out a back end on a third-party server, and it's GraphQL. So there's just like a lot of stuff here. So like, please don't get overwhelmed and think this is all Vue and that Vue is overwhelming and scary. Because I mean, the beauty of Vue is that it's really easy, and like because of that, Drew's throwing in like a million other really cool things that are hard to come across taking a look at these days, because they're just like, again, whether GraphQL, etc. There's just so much other stuff going on here that's like cutting edge in the industry right now, but you definitely don't need all of those to be using Vue. But we learned a lot, and again, super cool. If everyone would unmute themselves and kind of clap with me, and just thank you, Drew. This is
Thanks,
awesome.
Joe.
Thank you so much. I can see clapping. I think everyone's still muted. I don't know if you heard it all, but I can see the hands. So yeah, exactly. Anyway, this is great. Thank you so much, Drew. Do we have any more last final words?
Yeah, I actually want to thank Drew. I seriously didn't think like I would understand anything, but as the video like started and as the conference started, and I thought like there are some similar concepts, and slowly I started getting it all. But at the end, it was a little difficult, and now I'm curious about 8-base and as well as GraphQL. I would like to learn it, and I'll surely learn it. In fact, Drew got me curious about it. And I'm so thankful. Like, even when you don't get the code, it's so inspiring. Like, it's like you were like Mr. Robot for me for a while. Like, I didn't get what's going on and all that stuff, but I was so interested to know. So thank you so much for inspiring and motivating. And like, I seriously love this session. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I think that's the compliment right there, man. Mic drop, Mr. Robot.
Yeah, that's funny.
Nice. Anything else, anyone?
Yeah, super helpful.
Cool. I would say if anyone wants to play around with this and start using it, for sure, open issues on those GitHub repos, or better yet, like join the Vue Slack channel, the Vue.js LA Slack channel. I'm on it every day, and if something comes up, I could probably just help you out straight away. Kobe, how do we join that again? What's the move there?
The easy answer now is I think we go to vuejsla.com, and there'll be links for you to get Slack invites, etc. John, we put a Slack invite thing in there, right?
Yeah. There's a invite for that. Just a link. Click on
Awesome.
that, and should send you an email or something.
Yeah, awesome. All right, team. Drew, this was freaking amazing. Honestly, like it's like so much information that I mean, again, we may have been quiet because we were all listening, but we've got the fact that you've got the repos for us and everything's also amazing. So thank you.
No worries, Kobe. Thank you.
I know we're running a little
What's
long.
next week?
Well, that was literally my next thing. Is I don't have a specific. I usually am out. I usually have a month or two planned out ahead. If anybody has any suggestions for what they'd want to potentially speak about next month, any thoughts? Anybody? Feel free to say something now or email me or chat or whatever. But if anybody's got a talk in them, we're open to presentations for next month. Cool. All right, Drew, this was excellent again. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to looking through the code. So thank you.
Good on you, mate. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See y'all next month. Take care. Thanks.